I don't remember the first time that I heard the tapping. As far as I know, it's been there all my life. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been stirred awake a couple of times a month, still hazy with sleep and delirious with dreams to an almost imperceptible sound. Quiet. So quiet that I can almost convince myself that it's imaginary. Tiny clicks that never fail to stir me from my sleep and keep me lying awake and listening. It's terrifying to me. When I was younger, young enough to see monsters in the shadows and demons in the dark, I'd lie completely still in my bed, paralyzed by what I was certain signaled my imminent death. I don't know exactly what I thought was coming for me, but I was afraid. I guess I was smarter back then. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I heard the tapping, the tiny clicks, and it frightened me. But like most childhood terrors, my fear went largely unnoticed and ignored. Oh sure, the first few times I screamed loud enough to wake my parents in the dead of night, and I did get some sympathy. And to be honest, I think my mother and father were confused as to why it was tapping and not monsters under the bed that seemed to scare me so much. Eventually, though, the patient searches of my room in the dead of night became a little less patient and a lot more exasperated, and I realized that my pleas for assistance were unwelcome. Didn't matter really. Whenever my parents were in the room, the tapping stopped, vanished completely. I could hardly blame them for their disbelief. But it always came back. Louder, too, on the nights that I went for help. Not angry, not exactly, just louder, incessant. Another reason I stopped asking for help, I guess. No need to make things worse. It wasn't long until I stopped calling for my parents that I thought to identify the sound. I don't know why it never occurred to me. I suppose we will have a way of dividing the logic of the day and the insanity of the night that it makes it hard to reason about that which goes bump in the night. But one Saturday afternoon it occurred to me that a noise produced in my bedroom would probably be composed of something that was in my bedroom. I tried it all. Clicked pens, rustled papers. It was almost evening when I finally found the sound. It was unmistakable. The sound of my own nails tapping on my closet door. And this chilled me. Of course it did. But what was I going to do? There was no monster in my closet. I took to checking religiously every night before turning in, and it didn't seem to have any effect on the tapping. There was no possible way for that sound to exist. So I got used to it. I know it sounds insane, but like I said, there wasn't much else that I could do. Besides, it wasn't like anything actually happened. The tapping only woke me up a couple of times a month, and even then, I was usually able to fall asleep again after a couple of hours. It was, well, normal. Routine. And routine overrides almost every other base instinct, I think. I don't think I ever thought about it consciously, but I expected the noise to go away when I moved out to college. I must have expected it because when I was awoken by the familiar click or the nails on wood my first week in the dorms, I was shocked. I think I always just assumed that the noise was confined to my childhood bedroom, a strange quirk to be left behind as I entered my new life as an adult. I was alone in my dorm room. I opted to pay a small amount extra in exchange for a private room at the end of the hall. I know what people say about the roommate experience being an essential part of college, but I never liked the idea of sharing a bedroom, and I just couldn't stomach the thought of my roommate being someone messy or loud or otherwise inconvenient. But I digress. I was alone. I remember the familiar confusion, the desperate gasping awake and grasping for the threads of dream space. The pitch darkness and the racing thoughts. The peeling of aborted dream film from the inside of my eyes. Slowly remembering where I was, grounded by the feeling of my bed and the sound that I had grown to know so well. Like I said, I was shocked. Even before, when I was a kid, I had never heard the tapping when I wasn't in my bedroom. Anytime my family had taken a vacation or I stayed over at the house of a friend, the tapping was absent. But now, here I was 1,000 miles from my childhood home and everything in it. Everything except, it seemed, the tapping. In hindsight, I probably should have known that there was something wrong. I mean, looking back, it seems so obvious. A strange sound from the closet plaguing me well into adulthood. That's a cause for concern. For psychiatric help even. But I just got used to it, I guess. I mean, I still thought it was odd, of course. And on the couple of nights every month where I awoke to the sound, I always lay awake thinking that I should do something about it. Never did I get too specific in my head about what I was to do. But for the most part, I was busy. I joined clubs, I went to classes, I indulged in some serious bouts of drinking and drug use that were certainly ill-advised. I had a typical freshman experience. It was September when the idea came to me. It struck me all at once, and once it occurred to me, I was embarrassed that I hadn't thought of it before. God, it was so obvious. See, we were watching a documentary in class. Some kind of anteater thing. Lives in the rainforest. Anyways, this anteater was nocturnal, so the scientists studying its diet had to set up special cameras to catch it during feeding times. Night vision cameras. Night vision is actually quite strange when you think about it. It's incredible, really. The inky, empty darkness can be so completely transformed into a picture. The picture is dark and distorted sometimes, sure, but it's infinitely clearer than the void it replicates. Eyes are so bright in night vision. Luminous and queer, flashing across the screen like shooting stars or torches. The anteater had bright eyes. There are nights when I dream of it. Those eyes and those claws. Claws tearing savagely at the ground. In my dreams, though, the ground is different. No longer the packed earth of the rainforest floor, no. In my dreams, it's wet. It's sticky. It glistens in the unnatural shade of green, and the only thought that I have before I awake is that it looks almost like meat. But I digress. The video of the anteater lodged itself in my brain, and now that I had the idea, I wasn't about to let it go. Night vision was a convenient solution to all my problems, a simple way for me to assure myself that the tapping was just a figment of my imagination once and for all. So I bought the camera. The tech store didn't present any real issues. I paid an exorbitant amount for the first camera thrust into my hands and opted for the extra memory cartridge so that I could store a full 8 to 12 hours of footage. I wanted to make sure that I did not miss a thing. Setting it up in my dorm took a little bit of creativity, and by the time that I was done, I was pretty sure that I had lost my security deposit, but I figured it would be worth it if I could finally put my mind to rest. I didn't wake up that night. Even so, I spent the following morning reviewing the footage and looking for anything that was off. And there was nothing. Just my sleeping form in the darkness, shifting every once in a while and finally coming to rise long after the sun was high. The next few days were the same. Nothing. I was starting to get discouraged. It was possible that this would be like it was when my parents came in. When something else was watching, the tapping just couldn't appear. I needn't have worried. It was late October when it finally happened. I spent the evening cramming for some midterm, then performing my now normal bedtime routine. I set the camera up, turned it on, and began recording. I didn't feel anything different that night as I drifted off to sleep, which seems wrong. I've always had the assumption in the back of my mind, I suppose, that A part of you knows right before something bad happens. Call it ESP, call it subconscious, but there's a part of you that can smell the shit in the air right before it hits the fan. I don't think that way anymore. There was nothing different about that night. Nothing that set it apart from every other night that month where I slept peacefully through till the morning. I don't know exactly what time I awoke. It must have just been past 3 in the morning. And that's when the noise always started at home. But I couldn't see any reason why that night should have been anything else. I heard the tapping. Quiet, almost unnoticeable, but unmistakable. The same sound that I'd been hearing for years. I looked in the direction of my closet door. So late at night that I wouldn't have been able to make out my hand if it was right in front of my face, let alone the closet across my room, but still I stared. My heart pounding through in fear or excitement, and I can't quite say now. I remember thinking to myself, this is it. Tomorrow you'll know. And all this time I still hadn't decided what it was that I would know after looking through that footage. Would I know that there was nothing in the dark? That I needed counseling? Perhaps I hoped that when I could finally see my empty room, the tapping would go away once and for all. I don't remember falling back asleep. But I must have, because the next thing that I recall is waking up to my incredibly abrasive phone alarm in the cool fog of an October morning. I was out of my bed instantly. I didn't even take the time to get dressed before grabbing the camera and plugging it into my computer. I started to scan through the footage, speeding up the runtime until my gentle turns into sleep looked like frantic writhing upon my bed. I watched the timestamp, and sure enough, at just after 3 o'clock in the morning, I saw motion, and I pushed play. At first, I thought that I had imagined it, thought that my eyes had played a trick on me at the speed of the film. But as I watched it, I saw it. The closet door, which I had closed firmly before going to bed and which I confirmed with a glance was latched shut now, was open. Not all the way, but enough that I could see a sliver of black in between the pale wood. Slowly, so slowly, the crack widened. I couldn't see into the closet, it was far too dark. But I watched in rapt attention the door swinging outward. It stopped after it had opened about a quarter of the way. And I sat for a moment, waiting. And nothing happened. I started to justify to myself, well, that's weird, but this room is drafty and the cabinet is old. I hadn't even begun to try and factor the tapping into my brain, new theory, when my eyes were once again drawn to motion in the corner of the screen. When I saw there was a hand. Now, I need you to understand that I don't mean a hand like you would think of it. It was hand-like. Close enough the familiar shape that when I was searching for what to call it, hand was the first thing that came to my head. But it wasn't a real hand. Not like a person would have. It was pale and long. The fingers, if you could call them that, they stretched half the length of the closet door. They were wrong, though, off. It took me a second to realize that there were no bulges at all where the knuckles should have been. Instead, were 5 smooth appendages branching from a completely smooth square of a palm. Then there were nails. I didn't see them at first because, unlike the shining brightness of the hand, the nails were completely black. I was disgusted when I finally made them out. Easily as long as the fingers and warped so that they were curved down in a sinister arc. And they began to tap. The night vision camera didn't capture audio, but I didn't need it. I already knew what sound those wicked nails made. It was the same sound that I heard as a child, lying awake in my bed and thinking of the boogeyman. It was the sound that I heard after a long night of drinking, stirring me to a kind of half-consciousness in the middle of the night and leaving me with nightmares and confusion. It was the sound that I heard the night before, as I lie in my bed unaware of the thing inside my closet. I jumped at a flash of light on the screen, my own eyes, and I found opening in the darkness. I stared at myself waking up. It's weird, watching yourself come out of a sleep. It's not something that you think about, but I'd bet very few people have ever actually seen what they look like when they're shaking off the vestiges of a dream. Or a nightmare. I looked on as my past self blinked a couple of times, and then turned his head to look at the closet door. I was staring directly at the hand, watching it back. I can't believe that I didn't know that it was there. My eyes were locked on what seemed to be the exact center of mass, and I just blinked slowly at the darkness. The fingers on the closet door ceased tapping for a pregnant moment, then separated and came together twice. My stomach sank when I realized this was a mockery of a wave. The fingers returned to tapping, and once again unbothered by my still body. The figure attached to the hand, though, did respond to my silent watch. From deep in the closet, something moved. I don't know how it was moving, because even with the night vision, I couldn't see inside the closet, but I just knew. There was something inside shifting. And when I finally saw it, it didn't move like any person or animal that I have ever seen. It didn't even move, really, just it kind of skipped. It was like watching an old tape on a broken VCR, flickering back and forth between frames and never looking quite natural. It emerged. Like the hand, it was long and pale. Spindly legs dropped from the cabinet to the floor, though there didn't seem to be any feet, and the figure never seemed to touch the ground. The legs were so thin, it didn't seem possible for them to hold up that kind of weight, and they, like the hands, were completely smooth. No knees, no ankles, nothing but thin white legs stretching into darkness. There were no hips to differentiate the legs from the torso, but the body was long too. The thing was so thin that I should have been able to see its ribs protruding from its body, but instead the chest seemed almost concave, as though there was a massive cavity just above where its stomach should have been. The shoulders tapered into a neck, stretching tall, far taller than anyone that I'd ever met. The thing must have stood about 8 feet tall when it finally stood at full height. There was no way that it should have been able to fit in my tiny dorm room closet, but then there was no way that any of this was possible at all. And then there was the face. The head was huge, jarring, unlike the rest of the body. It was all sharp angles. I could make out every feature, and each was distinct, but they were all just the slightest bit off. The cheekbones were too low, the jaw was too long, there was no nose or ears as far as I could tell, but I must have just missed them because when it opened its mouth, I couldn't look away. When it opened its mouth, I could see rows upon rows of teeth descending down its throat like some kind of demented staircase. I didn't want to look at its eyes. I felt a kind of sickness overtake me every time I tried to force myself to look above the shark's mouth, so overpowering that I had to force down nausea. And when I finally tore myself away and looked, I froze. There were no eyes. None where there should have been. Instead, there were twin chasms, voids taking up at least half of the face. They were pitch black and endless. And when I looked into those eyes, I knew in my heart that I was damned. I don't know how else to put it. It was like all at once this vice of despair had me in its grasp, a weighted blanket thrown onto a person drowning in the sea. Up until this point, the creature had been staring at my blinking form still lying in the darkness. Now it turned its head to face the camera in the corner of the room. I know I said that it had no eyes, and that is true. But I need you to understand that it was looking at me. Not the camera me. The me that was watching the video. It opened its mouth and its body did a kind of spasm, sort of like when a dog jumps back after you accidentally kick it. I could have sworn that it was laughing at me. I don't know why the laughter is what finally snapped me out of whatever trance that I had been, but I threw the camera away from me at full force, and it shattered instantly, and my room was showered in a storm of plastic and metal and glass. I didn't even notice that my feet were cut and bloody, or that I was still in my pajamas before I got to my friend's room and asked to stay there. He was kind enough to agree. I guess it would have been a hard case to turn away, cut up, sobbing and raving about a monster in the closet. My friend Tyler made it very clear that he considered this a kind of nervous break, maybe brought about by the coming midterms. I met him with far more hostility than was probably due, given the circumstances, and quickly realized that regardless of what I now knew to be true, my story would be hard to sell to everyone else who didn't see the actual monster living in my closet. His own roommate, who had gone home for the latter half of the semester due to unprecedented stress, had left him with a double room to himself, a fact that worked out exceedingly well for me. I don't know exactly what my long-term plan was, but for the time being I figured that the best thing to do would be to stay around others. After all, the tapping never came around when other people were in the room with me. So maybe that meant that the creature wouldn't be able to come out. I wasn't sure, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to stomach going back to my dorm room. And late at night, I would think about that room. I knew that I had left the shattered remains of the camera on the floor, and all I could imagine was the creature scrabbling its way out of the closet and finding me missing from my bed, wondering where I was, and searching. A few nights into my extended stay with Tyler, I woke to the unfamiliar. Not the typical distortion of waking up in a room that was not my own, but a feeling deep inside that something was wrong. It took me a moment to fully shake myself from sleep, but when I did, I realized that I was out of my bed, standing in the center of the room. I had never slept walk before, even as a child, so this was distressing to say the least. And when I brought it up to Tyler the next day, he once again attributed the odd happenings in my life to stress. I wasn't so sure. I was even less sure when the same thing happened 2 days later, and then the day after that. Each night I would awake just after 3 o'clock in the morning, standing in the dead center of the room. I always woke up hard, with a start and a shake, and I always was incredibly cold. Even more concerning, I always woke up facing my closet. Paranoid, I started marking the place that I woke each night, and much to my sinking dismay, I found that, indeed, every night I was roughly one step closer to the dreaded closet. Half jokingly, I asked my friend Tyler to tie me to the bed, which seemed to be his breaking point. And I can't really blame him. I don't know what I would do if I felt that my friend had gone off the deep end. Regardless, he told me that he was sorry, but that he didn't feel like he could have me stay with him anymore. He told me that he hoped that I found help, but that he just couldn't do this anymore. And I left, almost numb. I wasn't angry. I wouldn't believe me either, I don't think. I checked myself into a motel, and that night, before I went to bed, I tied my hand to the headboard in a knot from my days in Scouts, complicated enough that my sleeping body wouldn't just be able to tug myself free. I wish I could say that I was surprised when I woke up that night at just past 3 in the morning, the ropes slashed to pieces on my bed, and my own feet resting less than a foot away from the motel closet. I haven't left the motel. I can't bring myself to. If you find this, please know that I did everything that I could. I am not crazy. I am terrified. I can't imagine what that creature wants with me, but I know that it cannot be good. I will try to stay awake now. Try to stay away. Even now, even in the waking world, I can't deny that I'm pulled towards the dark abyss. And part of me knows that I am not strong enough to fight. Wants to go to those doors, open them, and curl up inside. And maybe I will. Maybe I'll have to give in to that urge and just wait there, never sleeping and always watching, so that the monster cannot consume my soul. All I have to do is keep myself from falling asleep. The only sound that can keep me awake are my fingernails tapping wood.